3.3. The cytoskeleton. Inside the cell, beneath the plasma membrane, there is an extensive interconnected network of fibers and filaments called the cytoskeleton. These are made of some different protein subunits that form the individual filaments, and the general purpose of these is structural support but also cellular movement. We can think of these as the infrastructure of the cell: rafters, beams, cables, and even railroads. Some people have suggested they're similar to the muscles and bones of an animal. The smallest of the cytoskeletal elements is the actin filaments. This is made of the protein monomer. The individual protein is a globular unit called actin, and this forms a chain, and then two of these chains are twisted together to form the actin filament. You can see in the diagram on the left the little structure that looks like strings of pearls would be the actin filament. Um, in the diagram on the left, this is a cell, and this particular image is a process called immunofluorescent microscopy. You can see the boundary of the cell up against a black background, and all of those gold fibers are the actin filaments. This forms a very dense network beneath the plasma membrane and supports the plasma membrane. In other situations, the actin interacts with some molecules that are molecular motors. They get their energy from ATP and cause cellular movement. Another cytoskeletal element is called an intermediate filament. The intermediate filament is made of a protein called keratin, individual keratin proteins, but instead of a thin strand like the actin filament, the keratin proteins are wound into a cable, and this creates a very, very strong filament. The functions of the intermediate filament is to support the plasma membrane, but it also supports the nuclear envelope. Here's another picture of our immunofluorescent microscopy technique. Again, you can see the boundary of the cell against the dark membrane, and the bright yellow structures are these intermediate filaments. They come out and almost form little spot welds there in the plasma membrane, and this helps anchor the plasma membrane. It can also anchor this cell to its neighbors, and there's a little void there in the center, which is where the nuclear envelope would be. And so these intermediate filaments also extend out and anchor to the nuclear envelope. The third cytoskeletal element and the largest is called a microtubule. It is made of a protein called tubulin. There are two different types of tubulin, alpha and beta, and this forms what's called a dimer. And then these dimers are arranged in 13 rows around a hollow core. So here's a diagram down at the bottom. You can see the microtubule. Microtubules help to support uh, the structure of the cell, but they're also involved in movement of organelles inside the cell. They almost make what we can think of as little molecular railroads. These microtubules extend various locations in the cell, and there are some of these molecular motors that get their energy from ATP, and they actually walk along the microtubule, and they can carry different organelles and vesicles and these things from one location to another inside the cell. The microtubules are constantly assembling and disassembling, and they originate in an area of the cell which is called the microtubule organizing center. That's usually found in the centrosome. Again, this is not really a structure. This is an area of the cell. The centrosome is usually very near the site of the nucleus, and inside the centrosome, this microtubule organizing center is where the microtubules originate and radiate out various locations in the cell. There are some other cellular organelles that are also found in the centrosome, which are called centrioles. These are little short barrel-like structures which are made of microtubules. They always occur in pairs, and those pairs are lying at right angles to one another. When we get into lesson 5 on cell division, we'll see that at least in animal cells, these centrioles are very important in cellular division. Some other structures which are on the outside, these are projections through the plasma membrane, cilia and flagella. Cilia are little short structures which are usually found all along the surface of the cell. Uh, Flagella are longer extensions or projections. Usually a cell will only have one or very few flagella. But in both cases, these are responsible for either movement of the entire cell. An example would be the sperm. Sperm have a flagella which allow it to move, or cells that have cilia, those cilia move back and forth, and that moves something across the surface of the cell. So, for example, our respiratory tract is lined with some ciliated epithelium, and that moves mucus up out of the respiratory tract, which helps to cleanse the respiratory tract. Both cilia and flagella are made of microtubules, and then between these microtubules, we have some of these molecular motors. They walk back and forth along the microtubule, and that causes the swaying or the whip-like action of either the cilia or the flagella. You need to be sure and go back and study the diagrams of that generalized cell, both the plant cell and the animal cell, and be able to identify all of these different organelles that we have discussed and also the different cytoskeletal elements. Plant cells and animal cells share many of the same parts: the nucleus, the endoplasmic reticulums, the Golgis, the ribosomes. Going to find these in both plant and animal cells. There are some differences, however, that we need to be sure and take note of. A plant cell has a cell wall, rigid cell wall made of cellulose, which is outside the plasma membrane. Animal cells lack that. Plants also have the chloroplast, which is where photosynthesis takes place. And plants also have a large central vacuole inside the cell, which is lacking in the animal cell. The centrioles that we mentioned just a moment ago, those little barrel-like structures of microtubules which are found in the centrosome, are only found in animal cells. Plants have a centrosome, however, it does lack the centriole.